guys, this is Alicia with Good Morning Sunshine. So today we started at 8 o'clock this morning, had 4 lectures, which kind of got shrunk down to 3, which was nice. I was supposed to be there from 8 to 5 today, but ended up getting off about 1:30, so that was nice. And didn't have to go to the 3 to 5 lab because we already did everything for lab plus the quiz beforehand, so that was really awesome. So a long ass day turned into a kind of shorter day. I still have tutoring later, but I'm going to go over the 3 lectures we did. So we had Pharmacokinetics, our last lecture, I think lecture 4, on half-life and dosing regimens. And then we had physical examination of the bovine, I believe. And then lastly, we had our last endocrine lecture as well before our exam on Monday. So I'm going to start with pharmacokinetics. So the definition of a half-life is the time it takes from the plasma concentrations of a drug to destroy by 50%. It is not the time that it takes for 50% of the dose to be excreted from the body. So basically, true or false, a drug's half-life determines dose frequency. That would be false. The dosing interval is sometimes longer than the dog's half-life. Drugs effective despite low plasma concentrations. Antibiotics with prolonged post-amniotic effect. Drugs that accumulate in cells and tissues. Drugs whose metabolites have different pharmacokinetics from the parent drug are active and have long half-lives. And then drugs whose effects are irreversible, so things like aspirin. And then we have dosing intervals that are sometimes shorter than the drug's half-life. These are drugs that accumulate with multiple doses to reach therapeutic concentrations, typically drug with long half-lives. And then we have short half-lives relative to the dosing interval, so greater fluctuation during dosing interval and less accumulation over time. And then we have long half-lives relative to dosing interval. This means less fluctuation and more accumulation in the plasma. So the top graph here shows short half-lives, and the bottom shows long half-lives. So here, I guess the half-life, so anyways, the top one shows the half-life of 12 hours, a drug given 12 hours, same as the bottom, but the intervals here, this one's a 24-hour interval, whereas this one's an 8-hour interval. So the C max here is lower, is 16.8, whereas the concentration max here is 34. And then the concentration min here is low, it's 4.58, whereas the C min here is 23.4. So again, long half-lives have less fluctuation, and whereas short half-lives have greater fluctuation during the dosing interval. So drug accumulation is has to do with repeated doses. So when drug is administered before the previous dose is completely eliminated from the body. The degree of accumulation depends on how much drug is being added to the body and how much drug is being eliminated from the body during the dosing interval. It can't be controlled by changing the dosing frequency. And then we got into steady state concentrations, which is the accumulation which means that accumulation occurs until a steady state is reached. So basically this means the amount of drug in the body will progressively rise until it reaches a steady state concentration. So when overall intake of a drug is in dynamic equilibrium with its elimination, so the concentration max and concentration minimum are basically the same from dose to dose. So, and this assumes assumes a stable dosing interval. So in general, this occurs after 5 half-lives. This is the point of maximum effect and the point at which adverse drug reaction occurs if they are dose dependent. So before the 30-hour mark in this, so here we had a half-life of 6 hours. So in order to get that half-life, we would times it by 30 in order to get the steady state concentration. So we times the half-life and by 5, because 5 half-lives is where you meet or reach the steady stable concentration. So that would be 30 hours. And then we got the concentration max as 16.93 and the concentration min as 9.89. So, but before 30 hours is reached, the plasma concentrations are getting higher and higher. But then once it hits 30, it stays the same. So that's when the concentration max and min are in equilibrium, and this is when it reaches the state of the steady stable concentration. This has to do with first order kinetics and not zero order kinetics. So linear first order kinetics, she was trying to explain this to us by using a bank example. So first order kinetics linear, so you would put $100 into the bank, and this would accumulate with a 5% interest rate, so they'll give you 5% of whatever you put in. So thus after 1 month we would have $105. But then we would put that $105 for the next month in, and then we would have $110.25 the second month, because that's accumulated by 5%. So the actual definition is the elimination of a constant drug fraction percentage per unit time. So it's proportional to drug concentration. The half-life does not change with each dose. It is a dose independent pharmacokinetics. And then most therapeutic drugs are first order within clinical dose ranges. So then with this we can predict plasma concentrations. When we increase the dose, higher concentrations, and it has a higher effect. So I can try to explain this. Here's a chart we got also, if you can see it. So at half-life of 1, so we start with 100 with the amount in milligrams of the drug. So we have 100 milligrams starting, and then hitting the half-life of 1 half-life, 50% would be gone. And then 2 half-lives, we would do 50% of 50, which is 25. We would add that on to get the second half-life of 25. And then again, we would do half of 75. Again, times it by 0.5. The 75 by 0.5 in order to get the 87.5. So that would be half here. So half of 25 is 12.5 remaining of the drug. And then you do half again and half again and half again. And then once you hit 10 half-lives here, 99.9% of the drug will be eliminated, and only 0.09 will remain in the body. So then she also explains zero order kinetics. So again, with the bank example, we put $100 in the bank, and the bank gives us $5 every month. So in the first month, this would get us to $105, and then in the second month, it'll get us to $110. But then we're losing money then, because we're missing the 25%, the 25 cents that we got in the first order reactions compared to the zero order reactions. So by definition, nonlinear zero order kinetics is the elimination of a constant drug amount per unit time. It is not proportional to the drug concentration. The half-life does change with each dose. It is dose dependent, and the half-life changes as a dose changes. Most therapeutic drugs will be zero order at very high doses. These are persistent longer in the body with toxic effects once it becomes non-linear. Almost any drug will exhibit zero order kinetics at high enough doses, which is outside the clinical range. So main reason for non-linear kinetics is the saturation of metabolizing enzymes in the liver. So capacity limited and low extraction ratio drugs. Other reasons being saturation of the GI metabolizing enzymes, the saturation of carrier-mediated absorption, the saturation of tubular secretion, the inhibition or induction of hepatic metabolizing enzymes, so drug-drug interactions and autoinduction and inhibition. Examples of drugs that commonly have zero-order kinetics would be carprofen, which you guys should know, aspirin, and omeprazole, and phenylbutazone. So then we got into more half-life stuff. So we can do a loading dose, which is a higher dose given first, so initially to get into the therapeutic range more rapidly, but then give regular doses otherwise. So this is for drugs that with long half-lives that require that take too long in order to reach therapeutic concentrations, so we need a higher initial dose in order to get this going. So here's a graph showing that. So this is a drug with a long half-life, so it would take the drug forever in order for it to reach therapeutic range. So they give a higher initial dose, which is the blue line here, in order for it to reach the therapeutic range faster. So then we have a constant rate infusion. So for that, those are for drugs with a very short half-life. Example would be dopamine. We give it as a constant rate of fusion. That way, usually in fluids. If not, you would be giving the drug every few minutes, which you don't want to do. But this keeps them at a steady state in order when you do a constant rate infusion. So the half-life is influenced by the volume of distribution and clearance. Higher volume of distribution will have a higher half-life. Clearance is slower, clearing smaller volume of fluid over time of the drug. This will result in a longer half-life. A large VOD, so volume of distribution, it distributes more widely, so thus equals the longer half-life, like I said. That was the end of the lecture to date. We also had lab on this that I told you about, so we did that early. So then we got into the bovine physical exam. So I'm going to start with that. Sorry, I have to scroll down because I was answering the objectives. So we started with normal body condition. Dairy cows have a scale of 1 to 5 for their body condition scores. Beef have a scale of 1 to 9. Dairy cows tend to be more slimmer than beef cows. So they have different scales due to different criterias. So again, physical exam in the bovine, not done on every bovine you will work with as a veterinarian. For assessment of ill animals is most important skill you can obtain. So what should you do first? Well, first you should get a little history. One key thing to find out is what stage in reproduction they are in. So for dairy animals, how many days in milk, so that's known as the DIM, are they? And different diseases, because different diseases affect dairy animals. And then in meat animals, we would ask, when do they last give birth? So if possible, you want to examine the bovine at a distance first. So you would check their attitude, so their position of their head, their body shape, so look at their abdomen and back, and position of animal and limbs and tail. You would get the respiratory rate and effort. You look at the evidence of secretions for urine, feces, discharges, and bleeding. and then evidence of eating, chewing, cud, and drinking, and then ambulation. So are they coordinated, or do they have any lameness? And also look at the environment they're in. So usually when you examine a bovine, they're in their actual environment, at least initially. And this is usually often a key factor in many diseases and injury issues. You would check limbs and tail, so bearing weight evenly, tail up or down. And then the position of the animal. Are they at the bunk? Are they eating? Are they down, recumbent? And again, looking at their environment, is it inside, outside? Is it muddy, dusty, ammonia smelling? So quality and quantity of their food and water, the weather, and how other animals, are they right next to them? Are they co-located within? And things like that. So then next you would move on to the close physical exam of the bovine. You would need a restraint for this, so a headlock or shoot head catch if available. You would halter tied to inanimate objects with a quick release knot, which we learned in the very beginning of vet school, or a upper hind leg above the hock. So the physical exam of a bovine is much more than a TPR. Cows don't enjoy having their heads touched, so you would save their head for last. So we talked about medical records as well. So everything you deem normal, you have to write that down. If not, you did not perform that in your physical exam. And if you're taking a court, they would say that you did not do it because it's not written in your medical records. So even if it's normal, you want to write that down. So you can go about the physical exam systemically, which means you examine each system as a whole. So again, respiratory starts at nares, listen to pharynx, trachea, and listen to left side of the lungs, and then listen to the right side of the lungs. She said this gets, the pros is easier to stay focused, less chance of missing something. However, she said it's a little bit harder to do this in a bovine, and she usually does the physical exam regionally. Regionally means you examine everything you need to in a specific region at one time. So on the left side, you would listen to the left side of the heart. You would listen to the left lungs, pharynx, trachea. You would palpate the peripheral lymph nodes on the left, listen to the rumen, auscultate and percussion left abdomen. And you would observe and palpate the left legs, and then observe and palpate the left udder. The pros of this, it does take more time and movement, but it's efficient in large animals. So if you want urine, you usually do this first if you want urine too. When you start moving around the cow for exam, they get nervous, and it's often hard to get the urine after you do the exam. So why would you want urine in the first place though? So for pH, dairy cows before calving often get fed a special diet. This is known as the DCAD. To see if it's working, the urine pH should be less than 6. We also like to check for ketones on cows. Dairy cows that have recently calved or freshened often get ketosis, which means high ketone bodies in the blood. So that's excreted in the urine, so that you would check this with a dipstick. And then all sick cows, how dehydrated are they? Are there any kidney and bladder issues? So then we got into the heart. So a regular heartbeat is 60 to 84 beats per minute in a normal adult cattle. It's normal to be higher in younger animals. You should hear the S1 and S2 are normal sounds heard, the lub-dub sounds. So S1 again is when the AV valves are closing. So the tricuspid and mitral valves, and at S2 that's the closing of the semilunar valves. That's the pulmonary and aortic. So the location, we have the pulmonic valve, which is halfway between the left elbow and shoulder joints in the third intercostal space. The aortic valve is just below a horizontal line through the left shoulder joint in the fourth intercostal space. And then the mitral valve is just below a horizontal line through the left shoulder joint in the fifth intercostal space. So I don't know if you remember the PAM from my earlier videos, but I talked about PAM where you have the pulmonary, aortic, and the mitral. And then you have the tricuspid valve, but that's on the right side of the cow, but it's halfway between the right elbow and shoulder joints in the third intercostal space. So here you're listening for murmurs, muffled sounds, and arrhythmias. So then we got into pulses. So we have the coccygeal artery. She said she has a hard time feeling this, but maybe she doesn't have sensitive fingers. And then we have the external maxillary artery. So we have to remember how cattle feel about their heads being messed with and can be difficult. So shouldn't have halter on when taking this. So the technique is to place your fingers flat on the cheek in front of the masseter muscle and move them back and forth so you can easily feel the artery. So the coccygeal artery is this one right here in these pictures. She said don't look at this picture because that's not how you do it. You usually just your fingertips. You're not like holding the tail exactly. And then we got into the respiratory system. So the book says that the respiratory rate should be between 10 and 30 breaths per minute, but she says she usually, with her clinical experience, she usually gets it between 20 and 40 breaths per minute. It is best obtained when the animal is actually resting, so in the distance exam. So location, you would listen to this in the larynx, so for inspiratory and expiratory, and then in the trachea for inspiratory and expiratory, and then the lungs. So you must listen to both sides, but for inspiratory only. And then we got into quality. So respiratory effort. So this would be the visual assessment of the abdominal effect of breathing. The breath sounds, are they increased or decreased? And abnormal sounds would be crackles, wheezes, and friction rubs. The lungs of a bovine are inspiratory only because inspiration is active with increased airflow. Expiration primarily passive, and due to the size of the animal and distance from the stethoscope are more difficult to hear versus a small animal. So then we got into lung auscultation technique. So you can't just lay the stethoscope on the bovine like you can for a dog. You need to put a little pressure, particularly if over conditioned cows, so those are the bigger cows, so you really need to press that stethoscope on in order to hear anything. So it's best to listen in the intercostal spaces. At most ventral site, you may hear the heart sounds. So here are the 4 places on the right and left side where you would do lung auscultation. So it's essentially symmetrical. So then we got into the abdomen. So your visual inspection is typically from behind. The auscultation is on the left for the rumen. Your auscultation and percussion on the left is for the rumen and displaced abomasum. But on the right it would be for the cecum, intestines, and the abomasum, displaced or volvulus. So then we got into the auscultation of the primary rumen contractions. So the quantity is 1 cycle per minute. It can increase with eating. You listen for 2 minutes and count number of contractions. So the location for this auscultation is ventral paralumbar fossa. I don't know if you remember the triangle thing that I told you in the last videos on a cow. The quality, so you listen for strength, how loud. It's dependent on contents of the rumen itself. You would listen in the low register. And then you would listen to the length, so how progressive is it. So you go from the reticulum to the dorsal sac to the ventral sac to the caudal ventral sac to the caudal dorsal sac. So she told us to listen to as many normal cows as we can get, so we can get a subjective understanding of what is normal. So again, here is the triangle I was talking about back here. And that's how you would listen, basically. Okay. So I also talked about pinging in one of my videos, but while you're listening, you would also ping the cow and make sure, she says it sounds like a high-pitched doink. So a ping is the interface of gas and fluid intensity dependent upon how much fluid and gas interference there is and the tightness of the organ. So the tightness of the organ means if the LDA so that's a disease in a cow. has been there for a few days, it is stretched out and large and often get a weaker ping than a new tight one. And also, if there's no ping at all, that's concerning as well. So there are others on the right, which is the uterus, the spiral colon, and the pneumorectum. But for now, these are the big ones. So as we're going, we're just flicking this cow. She showed us a video on it, and the cow was getting upset because I guess that cow has been doing videos all day. So it's pretty funny. And then we got into the external lymph nodes. So visual you should not be able to visualize if the lymph nodes are normal. The locations are the submandibular, the prescapular, the prefemoral, and the supramammary. The quality, you compare a left to the right, the size and consistency. So here's all the lymph nodes. They're in blue. So we have the mandibular ones here, and then these. So the shape of the submandibular ones are roundish. The prescapular ones are ovalish. The prefemoral ones are tubular, and the supramammary are difficult to feel if normal. So then we got into the skin and limbs. As you're moving around the cow, use your eyes and hands. The skin, you're checking for wounds, bumps, missing hair, and ectoparasites. The limbs, you're looking for symmetry, swellings, abrasions. You would palpate down the legs. And then the head, we're looking at the eyes for discharge. Are they sunken in? Or there's an injected sclera. For the nose, we're looking for discharge and wetness. We're looking for symmetry of the eyes, lips, and ears. The mouth, this is how we check age, is in the teeth. And the quality of saliva, is it clear, is it odorless? It can smell faintly if they had just ate or are eating. So again, the incisors are used to age a cow. They have 3 incisors that they lose at 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5. So the ones in the middle are number 1, and then the ones next to is 2, and then we have 3 in the back. So in calves, they have 8 deciduous incisors, and they're smaller and wider in color than the adult teeth. Typically, incisor 1 and incisor 2 at birth, all in by 1 month. In older cows, a broken mouth is broken or teeth missing, a smooth mouth or popcorn teeth, incisors worn all the way down to the gums. And then we got into the hydration status of adult bovine, above the eye or the neck. So why is this necessary? So we have degrees of dehydration. So mild dehydration is 6 to 8%. This means slight eyeball recession, skin tint slightly prolonged 2 to 4 seconds, and mucous membranes are moist. And then we have moderate dehydration, which is 8 to 10%. Eyes are obviously sunken, skin tint obviously prolonged 4 to 8 seconds, and mucous membranes are tacky. And then we have severe dehydration, which is 10 to 12%. She doesn't go by any of these percentages, but the eyes are severely sunken into orbits. The skin remains tinted indefinitely, and mucous membranes are dry. So in mucous membranes, we're looking for the color of them, the moisture of them, their capillary refill time. And in males, their mouths mostly for hydration, not so much color and not so much CRT. They use and the sclera for injection. They would use the back end to do mucous membranes. So the back end we do for fecal quality, how much is on the tail, is the tail wet, how tail is the stack, or how tall is the stack. And then temperature, we lube it up and then turn to the side to take the temperature at the wall of the rectum so we don't get any feces in it. And then the udder, we look for symmetry, redness, heat, swelling, pain, and milk. So the normal temperature of a bovine is between 99.5 to 101.5. It can be slightly dependent on the external environment though. So the temperature are their fans, or their housing, activity and excitement levels. And then fecal quality, how tall is the stack? Does it splatter everywhere? Is it essentially liquid? Does it stand up more than 2 inches and look like a horse apple? She said she actually had the perfect pile of poop, and she was taking pictures of it, and people were like, what are you doing? And she's like, this is a perfect pile of poop. So I thought that was really funny. And then she showed us a video of how to milk a cow. So that was fun. We need to know how to do this, but yeah. And then we got into readily palpable abdominal organs. So this includes the rumen. You would feel the rumen with deep palpation, usually all the way to your shoulder when you're doing a rectal. On the left, you have ventral and dorsal quadrants. I'm using all fingers together to determine dentability of the rumen. And then we can also palpate the left kidney, which is also in deep palpation. It's at the midline, but not firmly attached to the body wall. So it's 46 inches down, and you can only feel the caudal pole of the kidney, so the back of the kidney. And then the intestines are usually in the lower right quadrant, but it's normal to feel nothing in this quadrant. And then the intestines are fluid-filled and soft. If you do feel something turgid, hose-like structures, gas-filled structures indicate something is wrong. And then palpating the rumen, the feel depends upon appetite, but effects of decreased appetite are not immediate. So that was the end of our bovine physical exam lecture. And then we lastly ended with the endocrine physio 4 notes. So we talked about the adrenal medulla. So its basic action is similar to a postganglionic sympathetic neuron. It releases catecholamines into the bloodstream instead of onto a neuronal synapse. So we have the fight or flight response, which is acutely stressful or for alarming situations. And then again, this being the sympathetic side, 2 hormones with overlapping function are epinephrine and norepinephrine. So again, adrenaline and noradrenaline. Each is produced by cells specialized for that one hormone. So receptors, there's lots and lots of details, but there's various types of receptors in various different tissues. So we have alpha-1, alpha-2, beta-1, beta-2, beta-3. The main functions of the adrenal medulla is to shunt blood from the viscera to muscle, and then raise blood glucose for energy, and then increase heart rate and stroke volume. So the final function varies with the receptor, and these in turn vary in their sensitivity to the 2 catecholamines with considerable overlap. And then pancreatic islets, the islet of Langerhans, which we talked about for the pancreas, are discrete small groups of endocrine cells scattered among the exocrine pancreatic cells. They have various metabolic effects. So the different types being the alpha cells, which was glucagon, the beta cells, which is insulin, the D cells, which is sammostatin, and the F cells, which are pancreatic polypeptides. So we're going to go about each of these in detail. So insulin is highly conserved sequence across all species. It is essential for moving glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids from the blood into cells, like the liver, where they are transformed into their storage forms. So glycogen being the storage form of glucose. Then we have triglycerides and proteins. Each of these are in their storage forms, or insulin puts them in storage forms. Insulin is essential for those functions. Their control is intricate, mostly released in response to high blood glucose. It interacts with a host of other hormones as well. This provides for fairly tight control over blood levels of glucose. Ruminants' blood glucose is lower, whereas non-ruminants it is higher, so it is metabolized differently. And then we have glucagon, which is mostly from pancreas, also from intestinal cells. It decreases glycogen synthesis. It increases glycogenolysis. It increases gluconeogenesis. Therefore, it raises blood glucose levels. So too little glucose would kill you. You can stay alive for a little while if there's too much glucose. And then we have sammostatin, which is many different sites of production. It inhibits secretion of other isolate hormones, and it diminishes gut motility. And then pancreatic polypeptides islets are the only source, and it increases gut motility. And then we have GI hormones, gastrointestinal hormones, from isolated cells in the gastrointestinal mucosa. They're not at a localized site. They include gastrin, secretin, glucagon, sammostatin, ghrelin, modelin, and there's a lot of other ones, but they help control the gastrointestinal tract. He said we don't really need to know these yet, but like I said, the gastrin, and all of those, they all have different things that they do. And then we got into calcium homeostasis. Calcium is a very important ion. It functions in cell membranes and in muscle contractility, and it must be maintained within a narrow range or you will die. Hypocalcemia is more immediately threatening than hypercalcemia. There are three main players. There are the hormone, there are calcitonin and vitamin D. These three provide for tight control. Some antagonism among them to achieve fine tuning, and then some redundancy to ensure action when needed. So the hormone is from the parathyroid. It is near thyroid in cats and dogs, but it's hard to find in horse and cattle. The parathyroid only sees calcium level and maybe some magnesium levels, but that's it. That's all they see because that's their main function. It resorbs the calcium from the bone. It increases reabsorption of calcium in the kidney. It decreases renal reabsorption of phosphate, and it upregulates activation of vitamin D. Calcitonin from the perofollicular cells, also called C cells of the thyroid. These C cells lower calcium, thereby increasing phosphate. Calcium and phosphate exist in a straightforward inorganic chemistry equilibrium. The product is usually about 40, with calcium being 10 and phosphate being 4. At a product level of 70, the calcium and phosphate simply precipitates out. So then we have vitamin D, which functions as a hormone. It is produced in the skin from ultraviolet light, essential for synthesis. Its inactive form goes to the active form by sequential steps in the liver and the kidney. It enhances absorption of calcium from the intestine. A high phosphate induces a pathway that leads to inactive vitamin D. Calcium and phosphate exist in a fairly straightforward inorganic chemistry equilibrium again. The product, again, is usually about 40, with the calcium being 10 and the phosphate being 4. At a level of 70, again, the calcium phosphate simply precipitates out. So a few summary points. It is complicated. The details are agonizing, and the big picture is too important to ignore. So the professor here, Sonnenberg, he wants us to know the big picture before he's getting into the fine details. So more summary points: the more critically important the metabolite, the more intricate and complicated the control mechanisms are. Most of these work somewhat antagonistically to achieve balance in a narrow range. So again, we need to understand feedback loops because they're essential to understanding the dysregulation that happens with chronic heart failure, where these systems are just seeing one thing. So if something is terribly going wrong, these systems only see not the big picture. Like, they don't see the heart failing, but they see just that they have low blood pressure, that we have low blood pressure, and they're trying to fix that. They're not trying to fix the heart failure because they cannot see that, if that makes sense, which can lead to the job actually not getting fixed and continuing heart failure, just making it worse almost. And that was the end of endocrine. So that was the end of my day today. I am going to get into studying today. I have tutoring, like I said. So I'm going to start going over material for the exam on Monday. A little bit nervous for that exam, but hopefully it will go okay. I need it to go okay. But yeah, I hope you guys had a good Thursday today. It's almost Friday, so we're almost there, guys. But I love you guys, and I thank you guys for watching me and my boring lectures every day.